I grew up in Big Woods, which is not far from Chestertown, of course. Wharton, Maryland is that area. And, ever since I can remember, I was drawn to music ever since I can remember. I grew up singing in the church. And then at a very early age, like they singled me out as a young boy around 5 who could sing solos and touch the people. And so it was one of those things, it's funny, like when you get older, you think back on that and you're a kid and you just take so much of it for granted. They just call you to sing and you sing the song and something about the music makes you feel good and you go along with it. And then I just, I fiddled around with piano by looking at my cousin who played at Church Money, Rochester, and I would fiddle around and listen to him play, and then I'd go behind him and play. And, then I went to, and when I got to middle school, I played saxophone. I picked up saxophone. And my sister Monique was also playing piano. And so she and I started to play, and then she kind of was like, I've done enough with the piano. And then I just took it over because I kind of just felt I had the ear for it. I just had the ear. So it's naturally just been with me ever since I can remember. I graduated from high school, and then I went to Peabody Conservatory. I got a full scholarship at the conservatory. And I loved it. I went there on classical saxophone of all things and piano. And then I had minor in voice. But I was just even then when I was there, I was working and I, could do all of that, but I was drawn to the music that I grew up listening to. I really loved like soul and R&B and pop music. And what I really loved was looking at like the album covers or the CDs and trying to figure out like trying to make connection with these people. A lot of the singers, they all would be working on similar things if they were in like Nile Rodgers' camp, or I'd be like, it seems as though Hamish Stewart is always on Quincy Jones, but he's also with the Reef Martin. So my mind, being the music geek that I am, I was more fascinated with that inner world as opposed to wanting to be a front man. Like to me, it was fascinating watching the names of those Luther Vandross, Patty Austin, Hamish Stewart, all of these names kept showing up and being on everything.
Right.
So my dream became, I want to enter into that world. And at that moment, I knew, my father wasn't happy, but at that moment, I knew that I couldn't get that at Peabody. And so then I made the change and I went to Berklee College of Music.
I see.
And then I could make the connections, it started to make sense. Issac came about because of John Schratwieser. I think when they were thinking about the Kent County Cultural Alliance and setting it up and all of these things, the house that is and will become the Kent Cultural Alliance is where Issac was the last place that Issac was enslaved, and he escaped from there. And John being such an incredible human being, let's start there, such an incredible human being, and but also a forward-thinking person in terms of arts and in terms of community, in terms of culture. He thought rather than us, putting the emphasis on the Mansfields who owned the home, I would much rather put the emphasis on Issac, the slave who escaped. So in the midst of this, he connected it with the C.V. Starr Center, which was connected to the Heartland Project, connected to the African American Museum and Smithsonian. And they were like, what can we do with this? And I think it was John and perhaps Leslie Raymond who said, we should have a story being told about it. We should have somebody who could tell the story, who could maybe write something. And I think Adam Goodhart said, well, maybe we should have Marlon. We should see if Marlon would be interested in writing a work. And so John reached out to me. This was like in 2019, actually, and I was in Maryland. My mama and I went over and we met with John and Mrs. Raymond. We were sitting there and, he was informing me of the story because I knew nothing of Issac Mason. So it was such a fascinating story. It was such a wonderful thing to be a part of, especially being that it's my home. And, that whole Eastern Shore has this incredible story of great, escaped slaves. For some reason, it's just all up in there historically. And so that fascinated me, of course. And, I think there's something about his mindset and his fortitude. And also too, just, I believe, this sense of faith. And I think it was faith. Of course, there's the religious, spiritual faith that he has. But I also think that underneath that is the faith and that sense of, instinctively we know inside of us when something is to be, and when it's calling us that strongly, we move in that come what may. And I think that's the thing in Issac Mason's story, to me, that transcends to humanity all over, and particularly as we move. For me, the thing that was interesting, I read his story and I was fascinated, and I reread it, and this came about in 2019 for me. And my first thought was to just be, okay, I'm going to write a traditional musical, but it wasn't resonating with me. It wasn't resonating in that way. And I think that was just because a combination of, like, I guess what my subconscious was perceiving, and also too in the sense of me trying to do the best for this story. The interesting thing was, we come into COVID. We're coming in the beginning of COVID, and in the midst of all of that, rescheduling, we as the world, we're looking at injustice happening again. So we had so much racial injustice that was happening here. George Floyd and the Central Park incidents, and so many others. Breonna Taylor, just tons and tons. And so what we began to see was this amazing generation, the new generation of folk who were just so very much ready to be vocal about what they saw. So I'm looking at all of this, and I'm thinking about all of these things, and I'm thinking about Issac. And then I had all of these things that I've written, and I only kept one piece that will be in the final, and everything else I started over, because I started to think and I reread, and I started to think and I reread, and I thought, I have to find a way to make Issac be symbolic. We meet, when he enters the stage, we meet Issac, who is Issac Mason, but then Issac Mason also has to be a symbolic figure who can move forward, who can move into and stand in there and be a contemporary figure, and then he can bounce back. So that actor has to be able to transcend within lines. A very, very difficult thing, and a very, very difficult and very, very hard thing for an actor to do. And Paris Nesbit, has found that way to come to terms with it, even though he told me, wow, this is really fatigue. I mean, it's very hard, it's fatiguing. It's a lot to take in. He really, really had me writing, throw something away, write again, throw something away. But it's been one of the most fascinating journeys in trying to find the core of what I feel is important for this musical journey that we'll be doing, and to have it so that people can take it in, understand it, and also find their space of this specific thing that he had without me giving it away. There's a song that's called God Has Spoken, and it's the duet is between Mrs. Woodland, Hannah Woodland, who owned Issac when he was born. So there you could, when Issac talks about him in the book, you sense the connection. You sense that he actually, there's a love, there's a connection, there's a liking there that goes both ways. So we have this idea of, I bring Hannah Woodland forward, and at the same time, I have a character who's called Modern Woman, who's Black, whose husband has been sent to prison. It's one of these things where we don't know all the details, but we know that she's in a situation where her husband has basically said, get on with your life, forget about me, raise our kid. And so they're both in situations where they're saying, God has spoken, and I want to do something else, but this is what the situation is, so just let God handle it. They both are dealing with these situations. And so Sue Matthews is going to be Hannah Woodland, and she said to me in the Zoom, she said, I really, really am just grateful. And I'm really, really just so amazed at how you were able to find the human quality in Hannah Woodland. And I said, well, if you read the book, you realize that Issac at that time really, really had cared for her. And he felt that caring in the capacity upon which they lived. Yeah. And I think oftentimes, you know, I often say, you know, we're looking for this end result MGM movie that's going to bring happiness and joy, and God is now saved the day. But it's not, I don't believe that to be so. I believe that everything in our lives, in our family lives, in our communal lives, in our friends' lives, in our partnerships with business, with love interests, it's all connected under the sense that it's going to be complicated. It's going to be filled with all types of things that is going to just move us through. And therein that is our humanity. There's a chorus that's going to happen that Issac sings in the second half. The song is called "A Place I Can Call Home," and everybody who's heard the music has declared that it's one of their favorites. John hasn't heard it yet. He's like, how come I don't know this song yet? But it goes, the chorus is, a place I can call home, where happiness is a real thing, my heart and mind imagining. A place I can call home, where love and more belongs to me, a life worth living, forever and always be. A place called home.